The purpose of this presentation is to discuss the most common two-factor authentication techniques used in social media platforms nowadays for their end-to-end role in providing additional security for user accounts in the event of logging into them. During the discussion, it will be discussed how effective these techniques are in terms of providing the expected additional security, what are the vulnerabilities they have when it comes to certain cyber attacks, what are the gaps identified among those techniques, how far have they been addressed in the current context, and what future improvements can be suggested in order to strengthen the security of these techniques. Humans are almost all the time considered the weakest link in cybersecurity due to several inborn characteristics and behaviors that can be exploited by cybercriminals. Weak password practices is one of the security threats that humans bring up, where they use well-known common password for easy memorization, reuse password across multiple accounts, use same password for multiple platforms or share them with others. Addressing this lack of security issue in password usage, two-factor authentication, or now most commonly known as multi-factor authentication mechanism, was introduced by security professionals to provide the additional layer of security to password protection. This includes something users know, usually a password or key phrase, something they have, traditionally a phone or a hardware token, something they are, such as fingerprints. One of the most commonly used method for two-factor authentication in social media is SMS. Users receive one-time verification code typically consists of 6 numbers via text message on their mobile phone number. This method is the most popular method because the most individuals have mobile phones capable of receiving text messages. To implement time-based one-time passwords, the user with their smartphone having the token generator application installed initiates the mechanism by synchronizing the initial secret key that was generated by the service provider. This synchronization is typically done by scanning a QR code provided by the service provider. Email-based token. This method is almost identical to the SMS-based one-time passwords, but the only difference is that the user has to connect to internet to receive the email, which includes the one-time password that the service provider sends. Common vulnerabilities that reside in these techniques make the efficiency of this extended security mechanism questionable. Therefore, analyzing each of them is important to identify the gaps and to know how they can be addressed to resecure this mechanism to deliver their expected outcome. The security of the SMS-based authentication is compromised at various stages of its operation. Messages sent through mobile networks lack encryption during transit, as the communication still uses some old traditional protocols. Also, SMS exploitation involves attackers stealing SMS codes through targeted phishing attacks. TOTP needs secure storage of shared secret keys for mitigating unauthorized access from the threat actors. If fallen into attacker's hand, this initial secret key could be used to generate valid TOTP codes as per their will. As in all cases, TOTP is also vulnerable to phishing attacks. Email token vulnerabilities are similar to SMS-based two-factor authentication. However, due to better encryption techniques, email tokens are better than SMS-based OTP. Email token is vulnerable to phishing attacks just as in other two methods. It was noticed that the common vulnerability that exists in all three techniques is the vulnerability to phishing attacks, which then leads to man in the middle attacks. Therefore, discussing on this special finding is important for us to determine the scale of the threat that exists and what prevention techniques can be used to resecure the two-factor authentication techniques in such a way that they can provide the intended extra security for password protection for users' accounts. In the reverse proxy based man in the middle attack, the attack is carried out in the following manner. Step 1. The user transmits their credentials to the login URL, which is mimicked using reverse proxy as the legitimate website by the attacker through a phishing attack. Step 2. Man in the middle intercepts and gets access to the user credentials and forwards them to the legitimate site real time. Step 3. The legitimate site then prompts for one-time password. Step 4. The user inputs the desired two-factor authentication into the mimicked website. Step 5. Again, the attacker intercepts and forwards the two-factor authentication to the legitimate server real time. The site issues a login session for the attacker. Step 6. The session is stored and then can be reused to log in from attacker's device. The mitigation of the reverse proxy based man in the middle attack is done through a mechanism called IP filtering. This mechanism uses few steps to carry out the task. Step 1. The user submits his credentials to the visited social media URL login page. Step 2. The social media server records the incoming IP of the client who requested the login page. Step 3. Upon entering the correct credentials, the server sends out the two-factor authentication request via email for an instance. Step 4. The user opens the authentication link within the login device that is connected to the internet. Step 5. If the IP from the credentials and the authentication link match, then only the session is established by the social media service provider. Out of all three observed two-factor authentication techniques, only the email-based token method uses the direct internet to carry out its operation. The other two methods do not require internet, hence the public IP monitoring process is not possible. This is a gap identified in this mitigation technique where only one of the three mechanisms can be assisted with IP filtering. As a solution for SMS-based OTP, the SMS service provider should provide the delivery note of the SMS to the social media service provider along with the exact location of the recipient who received and opened the OTP via radio location technology. Radio location technology is a technology that uses cell towers to determine the location of the subscriber. If the location matches with the social media user's usual location, the session is established by the social media service provider. For TOTP method, token generation application must collect the user's GPS data and transmit it to social media service provider. For this procedure to implement, token generation application must require the user's smartphone to turn on the location service. Then similarly, the social media service provider should compare the application location and the user's usual location to establish the connection.